and welcome to the DM's Book Club, a weekly book club podcast where we talk about some Dungeons and Dragons, or not in this case, and discuss how we would use it in our role-playing campaigns. Today, we've got a very exciting guest. We have the wonderful Michelle Kelly with us in the call. Hello, Michelle.
Hello, hello.
How are you, my friend?
I am very well, thank you. I am nice and cozy in my giant jumper.
Yes.
The way we need to be, because it is cold outside.
It is so cold outside. Yeah, for listeners at home, I've got 2 blankets on and a dressing gown. I wish it was a fancy dressing gown. It's just an old grey dressing gown, but it is so cold out where I am. So
it looks like it's got some nice stars on it. It looks very cute.
I love your cardigan as well. So yeah, we're both very toasty in here to talk about TTRPGs. Michelle, my big question, as always, to start us off is, how did you get into role-playing games? What was your origin story?
I'm very much an actual play baby. I started off, I listened to a lot of podcasts, so many podcasts, and I came across a few actual play podcasts when I didn't really even know the genre had a name. One of which, the super famous one, is The Adventure Zone, which is by the comedians, the McElroy brothers. I didn't really know anything about, I'd heard of D&D and stuff, but I didn't know much about it. So I listened to that. I thought, this is fun, listening to people who know each other playing games together, and I found a couple more. There was one Blades in the Dark podcast called The Magpies that I really enjoyed. And I found myself like, I really want to have a go. I want to have a go at doing these games. I'm really enjoying listening to people play.
Sounds great. I want to have fun.
It seems like fun. And then it was actually really in lockdown. I'd had the odd shot at like a one shot, but then in lockdown when there was very little to do, apart from sit at home on Zoom calls, myself and some other friends started meeting up to do regular games. And it was from that I just really got into role playing, and from there was like, I want to start doing some of this actual play stuff. And that is what I do a lot of now. So yeah, I started actual play and I've ended up now being in them myself, which is really, really fun.
A nice sort of circle, a nice sort of cycle. So were you always, because you mentioned Blades in the Dark, which I know we'll come on to in a second, but like, do you have a particular type of game? Because you said you started off with the Adventure Zone, which I know is sort of D&D high fantasy stuff, but do you have a particular genre that you like playing, or are you just open to any kind of story?
I'm open to just about anything at this point. I actually, probably the high fantasy D&D stuff is probably what I do the least of at this point. Maybe I'm just a contrarian and I'm like, it's too popular, I'm too cool for that stuff. But I just really enjoy playing indie systems. There are so many creators like bringing out such fantastic, unusual and inventive games and settings, whether that's like a one-pager or a zine or a whole book. Like there's so much to explore. So I really enjoy just picking up a new system and giving it a go. But I'm drawn to the ones that give you lots of room for narrative and aren't too mechanics and rules heavy, don't have too many pages of like roll this to do this and add these numbers together, but a lot of lore and storytelling and creativity. Those are the ones that stick with me for sure.
Nice. And so you obviously you said you started in lockdown and stuff. Like, was the transition between player to GM very quick, or were you always like, I'll sort it out, I'll be GM? You know what I mean? There's always like the forever GM, or I'm a player, but I guess I'll run it, and then never looked back. Like, yeah.
I definitely was like, okay, I'm bored and we're going to do a game together. And if that means I'm running the game, then so be it. So I started GMing pretty early on into my like role-playing game experience. And, you know, I probably made a lot of mistakes, but luckily a lot of my group had all more experience than I had. So a lot of them were like kind of very much held me and like helped me and guide me and like gave me advice and stuff when I wasn't sure about how to run something. So that made it really fun. They weren't kind of giving me a hard time if I had to be like, wait, I hadn't thought about this. I need to think of something. You know.
That's awesome, because I had that sort of experience of like going, well, I'll run other games that other people don't know and then they won't question me. But that's quite nice that you had a group of folks who obviously had experience, but they were like, yeah, give it a go, and give you that confidence. Because I know there's sometimes that worry as a player, like, oh, I want to run something, or I think I might run something, but I don't want to get stuff wrong. So that's so nice to have that sort of like a supportive group going like, yeah, more stories that we don't have to run, but we'll support you and we won't be like questioning your rulings or anything like that because we just want to play.
Yeah, absolutely. My partner is the person who's worse for questioning my rulings, and they will forgive me for saying this, but when I play with them, like they are the one who will be like, are you sure? And I'm like, are you fighting me? Are you fighting me right here in front of our friends? Do you want them to have to watch mummy and daddy fight? Because we will. But yes, the rest of my group are less argumentative than they are. So
That's so funny. It's very rare that my partner and I are in the same game, but I've had similar things, but I'm the opposite one. I'm the one that questions the rulings just because I have the book open and I'm like reading as we go and I go, actually, it says here. And like my partner's like, it doesn't matter. And to be fair, it never does matter because obviously the rest of our group isn't as au fait as I am with TTRPG. So we've got like a more lower experience, sort of like people just trying out new games. Michelle, what is our topic of choice for today's DM's Book Club?
Well, as I have already referred to, we are going to talk about Blades in the Dark.
Oh, exciting. So what is Blades in the Dark for people who have lived under a rock for like the last decade or so?
Blades in the Dark is a absolutely fantastic TTRPG. It is published by Evil Hat. It's created by someone named John Harper, and it uses a sort of D6 based system. So you only need D6s to play. The setting is a sort of dark fantasy Victorian Europe kind of vibes. We've got canals, we've got districts of a city, we've got horses and carriages, but we also have got ghosts and demons and occult things going on. And the game book has all of this gorgeous lore about this setting. The one thing I really like is that it encourages you to kind of pick and choose the bits which interest you. There's no kind of expectation you're going to memorize all of these names and places, but rather you can kind of open and say, we're going to go to this part of the city. Let's see what's there. So within this city, there is a lot of inequality, wealth inequality, power inequality. And when you're playing Blades in the Dark, you play as a group of scoundrels, of outcasts, of criminals who are forming a crew together to try and make their way in the city, try and get some wealth, get some power for themselves. And over the course of the game, you create contacts, you run scores, as they're called, which are different kinds of basically crime jobs that you're taking to make some coin. And hopefully over time, your crew gains in influence and power and makes a bit of a name for itself in the city and starts to change the city around it.
Yeah, and one thing I like, firstly, is that your player characters are called scoundrels. I'm always a big fan of like not PCs or game masters, like scoundrels, because that really, again, fits the vibe in one word, is that you are morally grey characters. Like you said, it's that survival of the fittest, and like, you know, how you get in the way in the world is by, you know, doing heists, by doing deals that normally, like, this is probably a very bad thing. It's like a reverse Robin Hood, except you keep all the money, you know, that sort of thing. Yeah, and admittedly, I remember when it first came out, and I think I like had one or two goes, like, again, that odd one session where I think certainly, and maybe it'll be interesting to hear your thoughts on it, because I know you've recently run as a live stream, as a live actual play series for Euphoria, the Blades in the Dark campaign, but it sounds like obviously you've run a lot more of it, is that this sort of system, this sort of game is, you need a couple of sessions in it to really benefit from it. It's very hard, I like, from doing a 1 or 2 shot of it to really get to grips with the system or get to grips with the story.
I think that's fair. I have run a very long campaign. I ran a 2-year campaign for my friends, which started in lockdown and carried on. So I have played one very, very, very long story with my close friends, but I've also run some one-shots of Blades. It's definitely a very different experience. I think that one thing which can take people aback at playing Blades is that its mechanics are punishing.
Yes.
The whole game system is kind of run on consequences. So it's not a game about being super powerful and being able to do everything you want to do. It's a game about being, as I said, a scoundrel, somebody at the bottom of the ladder of the pecking order in this society. And so while you are skilled, you are often contending with things way above your station. So as I said, you're rolling D6s. You roll more D6s depending on how good you are at a skill. And you always take the highest single result. If you get a 6, you do it. Hooray. That's the only way you do it without any problems. If you get a 4 or a 5, you succeed at what you were trying to do, but there is a consequence. And if you roll a 1 to a 3, you don't succeed and there's a consequence. So the majority of the time, 5 times out of 6, something unexpected or bad is going to happen when you roll dice. And I think that can make people a little bit taken aback at first when they're used to playing other games where your odds of success are much higher. And it can make people a bit frustrated thinking, oh, everything's going wrong. And it's kind of a different way of approaching the game when you understand, no, the consequences are what's driving this story.
Yeah.
Like the whole point is that you are battling against the odds. Everything you do has unforeseen consequences, and how you deal with that next thing to eventually get out of there alive is where the fun is.
Yes.
And so with one shots, especially when you're starting with beginner characters who aren't really very good at anything, and your odds are even worse, like I have to kind of tell people, especially those who are used to playing role-playing games where they're maybe more used to playing the hero and that sort of empowerment fantasy type of game, I have to say, you will feel like you're failing a lot. That is this game. Roll with it. Drive your character like a stolen vehicle, especially in a one shot. Like, let stuff go wrong. Like, embrace the chaos of it, and you'll have more fun. But that can be an adjustment, I think, for some people.
Yeah, I really like that. Yeah, the drive it as if you've stolen a car. I think it's such a great motivation. And the other thing I found when reading this book as well, it mentions time and again that, yeah, you're failing a lot, but your characters aren't fools. They're not idiots or anything like that. They are clever and they are getting things done. So the mishaps aren't necessarily like, oh, I've dropped a key. Oh no, it's like the guards are on their way. There's been a miscommunication, and so that also feels like the story then is elevated from possible farce. Because let's face it, like some D&D campaigns are often like, here's the realism, but then here's actual, and it's like, oh no, we've absolutely ruined everything. But here it's like it feels very serious in the sense of like, obviously you can have comedy. I've seen that obviously in your own series of Blades in the Dark on Euphoria. But what I really appreciate is that you punish players, but not because the characters themselves are fools and haven't thought of these things. It's just consequences, and then they have to react to it. And I just thought that was so nice. And again, something I would tell to players as well if I was running this, just to be like, hey, let's don't think like, oh, I've slipped up on a banana skin or anything like that. It's more like there are other things that you have planned for this, and hence that's why you have like the flashback mechanic and all that sort of thing as well to build into it.
Oh yeah, I love the flashback mechanic. It's I think it's described in the book as like watching a heist movie, like Ocean's 11 or a classic heist movie, where you don't plan out what your plan is going to be before you start the score, as they call it, the job. You just go in, and at any point during the session, you can say, I want to do a flashback. Actually, I planned for this exact thing happening. And then right then you can do your flashback scene, like in these movies where, the voiceover explains how you were totally prepared for this. And I love that because I think it really encourages, again, just trying stuff, just going for it and knowing that, okay, there's a high chance this will go wrong, but I also have tools in my arsenal to deal with it if it does go wrong. I think that for myself as a GM and as a player, to be fair, around the table, one thing that I don't necessarily enjoy personally is spending ages and ages like debating, what should we do? Should we do this? What if this happens? I'm the sort of person who's like, let's just do
go
something. Let's just try it, because ultimately it's not about making the right or wrong choice. It's about the dice deciding if that works. And as like you were saying, if the dice decide it didn't work, it's not because you screwed up. It's because the situation was out of your hands.
Yeah.
And I love that. So let's see what the situation gives us. And maybe we can flash back if it goes wrong. Like, that's great.
I love this idea that it really encourages you, like, okay, here's the score, here's the sort of main bit of the mission, here's some obstacle, and it sort of gives examples in the book saying like, okay, how do you get to this place? What do you do? And the players were like, well, I guess we go through the rooftop. We go, okay, you're already there. You're at this thing. Like, you're already in media res. And I just thought that was so cool. Like, oh, and the GM can just do that. We don't have to have, as you said, like, you can have gathering information and all that sort of thing. But like, whatever happens, you're just immediately there at the beginning of the heist. We don't have, as you said, the big long planning thing. Because as TTRPG folks in general, and obviously we've played lots of different RPGs, there is a tendency, we like talking. We like thinking, oh, well, what about this? What about that? And it just, again, we like navel gazing. That's fine. But it, like, when you're in a game like Blades in the Dark, you want to get to the action. You want to know how it works out. Because it to me, it feels like a session of Blades in the Dark should ideally be one complete score plus downtime. So it's like, here's that mission done. Whereas obviously other RPGs, you might be like, have an adventure that's split up into several different sections, so you take more time over it. But whereas Blades in the Dark is like, you need to make a point of it now. You need to do the action now. And then next time, it's like an episode, a TV episode. It's like, oh, what's going to happen next week? Will the blue coats find us? All that sort of thing.
Yeah, you've hit on that exactly. I'd say the vast majority of my sessions when I'm running Blades are one story, one adventure, from getting the job to planning that very mild bit of planning that you do, which is very quick,
Yes.
to getting into it, to hopefully succeeding at the job and getting the heck out of there. And then there'll be a little bit of what they call downtime, which is just kind of setting up yourself ready for next session. Occasionally I will split it over 2 sessions if time requires. In fact, in the series that I've just done on Euphoria, episodes 2 and 3 are 1 mega session. But even then, you can usually find a good kind of stopping point which doesn't feel as though it's dragging. And I've never had one that goes beyond two sessions, because like the way the game is structured really encourages you to keep moving and keep the story going and get yourself to, you know, the end of the episode, as you said.
Yeah. The other thing you mentioned, like flashbacks, obviously it's a quite unique mechanic to Blades and Dark. The other thing which people might not be aware of, if they've not come across Blades and Dark before, is this idea of loadout as well. So that you don't have necessarily a set list of equipment or anything like that you always go, oh, what's in my bag? I've got a bit of rope, etc. You prepare like how much load you can carry before each score, and then you decide in the moment what you have. So whether it's a pistol or another pistol or something that takes up load, so you decide how much you're going to carry with you. And I really like that. Again, it forgets that sort of planning and the horde mentality of like, I have everything on my back, so I'll be fine. It's like you had that item, the right item for the job. And I just really appreciate that sort of like, again, very, very simplistic, but also then limits you because, oh, well, I've only taken a light load. So that's like, what, 2 or 3 items. Oh, these items better count, you know, and then, oh, we've got a heavier load. Okay, well, it's more obvious. So maybe there's going to be more consequences down the road because it looks like I'm carrying something that shouldn't be here at a mass ball, for example.
Yeah, 100%. It kind of feels like an extension of the flashback that you don't say ahead of time, I'm taking XYZ with me. But at any point you can say, oh, I just so happened to have brought this pistol. And I do love that at least one of the playbooks, they all have a list of possible items you might have brought. I'm pretty sure one of them says a pistol and then a second pistol. So you can exactly do that where, you know, maybe you lose your pistol as a consequence for a roll that went wrong. And then you go, oh, well, luckily I brought a second pistol, which is just great and fun. And as you say, like, you can be kind of comedic with it. Like the stakes are quite real and the story is quite dark in its setting. But I often find the tone goes almost more towards a caper.
Yes.
I always compare it to this TV show called Leverage. It's an American TV show. It's an episodic thing where there's a team of 5 criminals and they pull off heists, but they're kind of doing it for good. So it's, you know, somebody who's been stolen from, they'll pull up a heist to steal it back, that kind of thing.
Cool.
So it kind of, and that show, if you've ever seen it, it's a heist. Things can go wrong, but there's kind of a comedic, light-hearted energy to it, and your characters really feel like one of these found families that you really care about. And I think that the crew side of things in Blades in the Dark really encourages that. One thing that I like is that you don't necessarily always have to play the same character. You can have multiple characters who exist in your crew and you can swap them in and out. For example, if somebody gets arrested because you get caught for doing your crimes, you can be like, well, while they're doing their time in jail, I'm going to bring in this person. And I think as somebody who's really, really interested in the role-playing side of things, that could be really fun because you can be like, how is this going to change the dynamics of our group on our next score when somebody's swapped out their character to somebody we don't know as well? Or are we going to mix it up? Or like, how do we feel about somebody going missing or going to jail? There's all sorts of fun possibilities for drama within your close-knit little found family of your crew, but also having extra characters that you can bring in and out as and when you please.
Because again, there's some amazing touchstones for Blades in the Dark as well. It obviously references Peaky Blinders, so I'm halfway through Peaky Blinders as a result. There are more people that, you know, the NPCs that suddenly come to the forefront because various characters have been killed off screen or have moved around or something like that. So yeah, I hadn't even considered that. The main sort of core stone of this is that everyone has access to the same crew sheet, whatever it is, whether you're assassins or hawkers or anything like that. Obviously, you choose that within the sort of joint character creation. But yeah, if your character gets retired, if you try to take heat off the team for a little bit, you go, well, I'll go to prison for a little bit, but you'll get me out in the end. I really like that. So you're not necessarily stuck with one character until whatever happens. You know, the consequences do catch up. So I really like that. So you can really test out and try and see, the different dynamics. You know, do you have like more than 2 whispers of people who are more attuned to the ghosts in a crew, and how does that work as well? Because it feels like, I mean, you'll be able to tell me this, that you can have multiples of the same character, the same sort of playbook, but like maybe it doesn't benefit from like oops all spiders or anything like that. Like obviously because you've already got the crew type, so you'll always have access to certain moves there. But like, I can imagine having 2 or 3 and then having different specializations of the different playbooks would be quite interesting.
Yeah, I think so. I think that the majority of players kind of by instinct, by being used to it, will say, oh, well, if you're doing that playbook, I'll do this other thing, so that we're not all doing the same thing. And I think that's totally fine.
Yes.
That being said, you can absolutely have more than one character of the same playbook because there's so much customizability within that. Every playbook has a list of special abilities. You only start with one of that list. So you could be two whispers who pick different special abilities and put their action dots in different actions. And so while you're the same type of character in that you're both sort of people who are ghostly and in tune with the occult, you might have very different ways that manifests within how you play the character, which I think is really fun. I think that this kind of playbook model where it's not a super specialization, it's kind of just a flavor of what you're interested in is really fun.
Yeah, I really like that because then, so obviously, you've mentioned it before, there's this ghost field and that the echoes of this horrific ghosts that just turn up every so often. But like, that's not limited to just the whisper playbook. Anyone can then attune and see these ghosts and be affected by them or affect it in some way. It just might be a bit worse for you if you're not specialized in something. Like if you're a cutter, for example, you're very good at fighting, etc. But it doesn't mean that everyone else is not very good at fighting. So I quite like that you're not limited. It's just giving you that flavor, like, oh, what kind of story do you want to follow? You still, even if you are sort of like a spider and suddenly you're in a fight yourself, you're like, well, I can still fight my way out of it. It's not going to be pretty, but I will do my best. So I quite appreciated that. Yeah, you're not being locked into like a trope or an archetype because you picked a certain playbook. And like you said, now you can, if you want to switch between playbooks between sessions for story reasons, then easily you can open it up to go to the other extreme, for example.
Yeah, exactly. And when I ran a campaign that lasted for 2 years, like most of my players did at some point switch out their characters just to try something a bit different. We've been playing for a long time. They were like, oh, I want to try out a character that is more going towards this kind of thing. And some of them just brought in a new character for like a couple sessions. Some of them started switching between two that they really liked. There's lots of possibilities within that. And I do really like as well that you decide where your character goes. And like you said, you're not bad at something because you have fewer dots in it. You're just less excellent at it. That's one thing that I kind of find often when people start playing Blades at first, they'll feel like they can only roll the things that their character is quote unquote good at. And it'll be a lot of, oh, well, I can't try and fight because I don't have any dots in skirmish. And it's like, oh, no, you can. Yeah. You can roll skirmish if you have 0 dots in it. All it means is that your odds are a little bit worse.
Yeah.
And I love that. That's another thing I try and push people through. It's like, don't feel like you can't roll something if you're not quote unquote good at it, because you're good at everything. You're a criminal. You're a scoundrel. This is what you do. All it's showing you is that what are your odds of success is what your dice are showing you.
It's how desperate you are in this moment, and you're maybe taking less care as a result. I very much appreciate it. I think it says in the book as well. It's like, you're still like, if you don't have a dot on it, you roll 2d6 and take the lower result.
That's right.
But like, you're still got a chance that you might succeed if you get 2 sixes. That's the sort of thing. It's like, just go for it. And like you said, like, you're driving these characters like the stolen cars. Make the most of it. Don't be like, oh, I can't do it because it's not on the character sheet. Again, something that's a big hangover from D&D as well. Well, I'm only very good at perception, so I'll just look around. And you're like, stop looking at your character sheet. What do you want to do? I want to shake people by their shoulders going like, what would your character do that's not mechanically there,
Yeah, same. I have someone go, oh, well, I would do this, but... And I'm like, great, you're doing it. Roll it for me. Like, you've spoken it into existence. Let's go,
We've cut out the planning. We cut out the sort of middle person, like going, oh, well, actually, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, you can do it. You can do whatever you want to do. It's a game. Have a go. One thing I really like about it is that your character cannot die without your permission in Blades in the Dark, which I absolutely love. So even if you do the most reckless, chaotic thing, it's possible if you go really hard over a long period of time, you'll have a choice between them dying or retiring. But you're going to know well in advance before you're at the risk of that happening. The worst thing that can happen to your character sort of in a general session is that they get knocked out of play for that session. Then they will be back next week. It's fine.
Yes.
On next episode, they'll be okay. I love that because, again, it encourages you to be like, I really can just go for it and try stuff and risk the consequences, because I know the GM is not just going to kill us all without me having any say in it. Which is something which, as a performer and who plays with people who love the role playing and get very attached to their characters, I don't want to have my character taken off me because a dice said so, you know? And I think Blades is really lovely that you can have that risky attitude while knowing that there's going to be a limit to what happens.
Yeah, you say what their ending is, and it just feels more like on the page that everyone is like, yes, that's exactly how they went out, rather than as often, the case the dice say something, you go, well, the dice say it, and it's like they can say it, but like, how do you want to do this? And I think that's so important in terms of player agency, considering this whole game is about choices and dealing with the consequences. I wanted to talk a little bit about your 2-year campaign, which sounds unheard of, I'll be honest. A legend to have a TTRPG go for more than like 3 sessions, a long campaign. Obviously, in Dustfall, there are several different factions. All of them, some of them are more esoteric than others. But was there any particular factions that you like that featured heavily in your campaign that were like? Obviously, I appreciate each story is different, and presumably, again, maybe you had a story or you worked with the players. What did the players want to do, and then go from that. But I just wondered if there's any factions that stood out as you were sort of playing this 2-year campaign.
Yes, well, there was a few things that my players really kind of latched onto, because I really did try and keep it quite episodic at first. I was like, we're going over here, we're doing this now, we're doing this now, and kind of see what are they interested in, and then we'll come back to them. My players were really interested in the Coleridge region, which is where the factories are. There's a lot of people from the fictional country of Scotland who are refugees from basically being invaded, have ended up there. So there's a lot of kind of workers' rights, industrial revolution type themes going on there. And my party got very invested in what's going on down there, and how can we, we're scoundrels, but we want to try and help the little guy here.
Yeah.
How can we do crimes in a way which is punching up, I guess,
Yes.
was something they got very interested in. And I'm like, you're supposed to be scoundrels. And they're like, we're scoundrels with hearts of gold. So, so they got interested in that. They also got very interested in the occult side of the story. And they became quite interested in a faction called the Dimmer Sisters.
Yes. I was going to say, Dimmer Sisters sound amazing. I assume they're going to be in every single Blades in the Dark playthrough. That's why I was like, because they sound really cool.
Yeah, I love them. I like that there's not too much in the book. There's enough to give you a starting point. But again, like, it's not going to tell you, like, this is exactly who they all are and what all of their motivations are and exactly what happens with them. It's a bit more like, they're a sort of mysterious family and no one's sure how many sisters there are. And are they really sisters, or is it just what they call themselves? And they seem to be, one of them seems to be a vampire. What's going on there? And it's just enough of a prompt to give you some room to start playing around and exploring, and sort of a story for our version of the Dimmer Sisters emerged, which basically involved a little bit of every type of occult creature that can possibly exist in the Blades book, because why not?
Yeah.
That was so lovely because we got really in on that faction, but there was also lots of input from all the other factions that they were touching along the way, which was really fun.
That's nice. Yeah, because as you said, there's loads of different factions here, and I'm really glad that you brought up, like, because obviously where Dustfold is, there's obviously there's a whole. We even haven't really gone into the actual setting itself. This idea that a long time ago there was this cataclysm and the sun burnt out. Everything is slightly dark in this very dim light, so to speak. And then the Imperium itself is trying to take over. So again, there's obviously this political warfare that's going on in the background. And as you said, anyone from all these different sort of countries can come to Dustfall, and you can have that sort of idea of, the refugee sort of crisis and like horrible sort of takeovers, like union rights. There's obviously all the stuff with like void hunters going on as well. So it's so nice that it's not just we're doing heist after heist after heist. It's clearly like there are other themes that you can pick upon, and it's nice to have, certainly in maybe today's climate, this game which can be easily very political, and really sort of like leaning on things about like people uprising against the status quo and like taking things back, and being able to play it in a safe space, whether it is on a smaller scale, she says in quotation marks, of like workers' rights, to then countries' rights, and then pushing it back against, the city council, the Imperium itself, like depending on what, and your crew is such a small part of it, but like you can choose what your role is. And I just thought there's just so much here as a result, and so much, like you said, even though it's like very small details about stuff, like there's not much about the dagger isles or anything like that, but it's like enough to be like, oh, what else can I fit in? So I really appreciate that, not only for GMs but also for players as well, to be like, I want to pull on this and have that discussion and start playing those stories.
I really like the politics that Blades in the Dark seems to be founded on, which is essentially a politics of power and money are corrupting forces, and that power structures are not necessarily always about being fair to everybody. What a shocking idea. Capitalism bad, question
Whoa.
mark. But also the idea that you're playing criminals. This is not a place where kind of authority and the law are sacrosanct, and that law is equated with morality. It's made very clear that the Bluecoats, which is the law enforcement, are described as themselves a massive and dangerous gang.
Yes.
They are very corrupt and they are cruel to people and they take bribes because that is the kind of society that you're living in. I think that that's really interesting. I think that, but at the same time, maybe you're playing poor people, but you're not Dickensian kind of deserving poor. You are people who also maybe do bad, immoral things in the fight to try and get yours, get a little slice of this action. And maybe that's because, you know, like I said, like some of my players, in fact, pretty much every player that I've played for wants to in some way try and do some good. I think that it's nice. The human spirit, you kind of want to try and do good in the worlds that you're creating, but often by doing maybe incredibly violent or dangerous acts to hopefully achieve something good. And I love that kind of moral ambiguity of it, that it's not so straightforward as, you know, the policemen are good and the criminals are bad. But just because you're trying to be a good guy doesn't mean you might cause some collateral damage along the way. I think that that's a really fun thing to play with. And it's also something that can be done in a very safe way, because if, for example, a refugee storyline is just not what you want in your life, that's okay. We don't have to go into that much about Scoveland people. They can just be here and we don't have to tell stories about that particular aspect. There's so much in the city of Dustfall in this setting that you can pick things which appeal to you, which I really like.
I hate comparing it to D&D, but like you think D&D fantasy, you're heroes, and there's always someone goes, yeah, but why don't we just rob everyone? Why do we, you know, the murder hobos, so to speak. And then here's the opposite. Well, you are criminals. You are the bad guys. But as you said, morally grey. We're going to help out where we can. Or like it feels such a more interesting story, because then you can play with those themes rather than just like, well, we're heroes, we're going to abuse that power. It's just a really different way of doing it. And I really like the one faction I always sort of point out is that you have the Bluecoats who are the corrupt police force, as it were, but then you have the inspectors who are like these investigators who are sort of neutral, and nobody likes them because they're so independent and incorruptible. So I just like this idea that you just have like, you know, an Inspector Cluedo or sort of like a Hercule Poirot kind of character, and everyone's, oh god, I can't do anything with this person, and they're always going to get into our business. Even the Bluecoats are like, god, I hate this guy, you know. It's just like
everyone hates that guy, he knows too much. No, absolutely. And that way of being able to play with kind of who are you being good to and why is really interesting. In the series that just streamed on Euphoria, for example, like spoilers for the end of the first episode, minor spoilers. It's all right. One of the characters, they get paid by the person who gave them the job, who themselves does not have much money. And one of the characters chose to give the money back. And that was such an interesting choice, because these are characters who they all said that their whole idea was that they had aspirations towards nobility. And within one session, one of the characters was like, actually, I'm not going to take the money.
No, not this money. No, I'll get my own money.
I don't want to be noble like that.
Yes.
And I thought that was really interesting. Like, you know, even when you're playing criminals who have just done a bunch of very, very potentially dangerous things to a lot of people, they still have their own internal limits. And I just think that asks so many interesting questions about like what we're willing to do.
And as you said, like, if you didn't want to do the more political intrigue stuff, we obviously have like sort of like the Deathland scavengers and all that sort of thing, because there is a district that has been lost because of the ghost, because of the thing. And this, we haven't even mentioned it, but this idea of this electrified sort of field that sort of keeps the ghosts out. And, you could have plot hooks about like, oh, we need to get an artifact. It just happens to be in that lost district. I don't suppose you guys would go out there. And you're like, that sounds dangerous. Sure. It's that sort of thing where you could, like you said, we could really lean into the occult stuff and like trying to find out more through ghosts and find out what has happened to this lost district. And there's obviously, we've got different sort of religious organizations that have forces on the city council. And so there is so much here. But this, again, it's like a couple of lines and then like, here's how strong this faction is, here's how weak they are, and here's what tier they are. Because that also affects you in the sort of downtime activities. As if you've rubbed someone up the wrong way, you're like, oh, okay, they're not pleased with you. You're at war with them. What does that mean? And it's like, oh no, is the city council going to come crushing down on you like a ton of bricks, and what's going to happen? So I very much appreciate, I've really got into sort of like not faction play, but having these factions and being like, okay, here are all the levels that they're at, and if you do something, well, that's going to affect that, that's going to affect that, and it feels very easy. Like, maybe it's a bit hard to keep it all in your head, but then you're like, well, there's three factions: one that likes you, one that's indifferent, one that really doesn't like you. Anything you do is going to piss off or please one of them. It'll just depend on what it is. You can't, and no one's happy. So I quite like that. And no matter what you do, you're like, oh God, now we're going to go give service to so and so, like the Dimmer sisters, and be like, hello, oh, it's so nice to see you.
Absolutely. And I love that part of the end of each session is entanglements, which you can roll on a table. Actually, I've just personally always just done them narratively based on what the crew have been up to that session. But essentially it allows you to have that episodic structure. But at the end of every episode, what you have done is going to cause something that changes the state of, your relationships with the factions, what's going on in the city, what's going on within your own crew. Something has changed because of what you've done. And I love that as a GM, because while it can seem a bit intimidating to look at this book that's just full of so much lore and such a complicated setting, you don't have to plan out some big campaign with a big storyline ahead of time. You just have to think of a plot hook for one score, and then we'll play it out, we'll see what happens, and now, okay, what's the entanglement going to be? What's the thing that you've caused by doing this? Now I have an idea for where we're going to go in the next session. And it can be as easy as that suddenly an overarching plot starts to build based on all of these entanglements and all of these consequences of the play at large, which I absolutely love.
Yeah. And speaking of downtime as well, so we sort of talked about before that, you've got the entanglements, the sort of the payoff and the heat stuff. But obviously they can do their own sort of downtime activities. And again, it's that nice thing because the majority of the session is that you're doing these scores and it's like action, action, action. It's like, but what are they like at home? What are they like enjoying their hobby? And you have this idea, like, because you're taking on stress, which is kind of like your sort of hit points to a point, like you're taking on a lot of like things all at once as consequences. And then you're like, well, you have a chance to sort of de-stress by indulging in your vice. So that's one of the other sort of flaws you get with where you were so great for your characters. And in the Blades current dark, I don't know how much you play into like the rolling and stuff. A lot of downtime stuff in the core book, you roll for stuff, and depending on how much you roll, obviously the more successful you are, high numbers are great. But I do always think like when you're stressed, it's like, okay, you indulge in your vice and you roll for it, and you're like, well, you only took off one of that stress. You're like, well, that was a bit of a waste of a night at the pub or a night of praying, depending on what your vice is. From the brief time that I've played it, I always used to think, God, this system is punishing, and there's no way to get off, like to get better at it unless you get another character in or something like that. So it was just nice to have that sort of, I guess, what else are they up to? And it's like, God, the consequences are still carrying over a little bit, and they can be quite punishing. But I know with Deep Cuts and the latest supplemental, it tries to negate it a little bit, going like, if you don't have to roll for everything in terms of downside, it could be a bit more narrative, like you were sort of talking about.
Yeah, the Deep Cut supplement's really interesting, actually. It's kind of it's a fairly hefty document, actually. It's more than I expected when I downloaded it. But one of the things, as you say, is this different way of doing downtime. And I know that John Harper's kind of said a lot of this stuff in Deep Cups is kind of stuff I started doing when I've been running Blades for a long time, and I kind of codified it a bit, which I found very interesting because as someone who has played like a 2-year single campaign and also played the game loads outside of that, a couple of the things in here are sort of very similar to stuff that I started doing that was different, which kind of to me says, all right, this is logical, this makes sense.
Excellent.
And one of the things was I adapted downtime to make it less punishing.
Yeah.
Because when we were playing every single week, my characters were starting to take so much harm and not being able to recover sufficiently. And they were finding it less fun because they were spending all of their downtime just doing recovery rolls.
Yeah.
And they were like, I want to do all this other stuff. I want to try and investigate a long-term project. I want to craft an item, and I've run out of downtime activities. So one of the things I found quite nice in this Deep Cuts is they have the diceless downtime system where you just automatically heal by a certain amount. Yes. And if you want to heal more, you can roll for it. Yes. You can automatically reduce your stress by a certain amount. But if you have too much stress, then it's not enough and something else happens.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that as an alternative, especially the harm healing was one that I pretty much immediately was like, I'm changing this because my players wanted to mostly play the same characters week to week.
Yeah,
and they couldn't do that with the amount of harm they were taking on. So I was like,
they're making rash decisions in the score, and then it's like, oh no, consequences. I now need to be in hospital for several, and keep rolling. Like, God, I'm only getting 1s and 2s, and this clock is taking forever to heal up. Yeah, I agree. I would recommend checking out the deep cuts in general, because I think they've added some interesting stuff in terms of obviously they've got a big campaign story plot thing that you can add into your games if you've been running it for a little while. But yeah, the other systems, like, I very much appreciate the harm and trauma and stress, sort of that downtime, sort of just streamlining it, because that's the thing, is just because it's ultimately like dice rolling should matter. I absolutely get it. But if you're in downtimes, that you're not in peril. You're not in the current score going like, I need to fix my foot quickly. Come on, and you're shouting at your foot to get better. It's like you're taking your time out. And whether then the story then is like a couple of weeks later when everyone is slightly better, or like ready to go out again, rather than like, we're going out tomorrow night, you better be ready. And you're like, oh no, my arm's still broken. Well, I'll see you guys when you come back.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember in my long-term campaign, one of my players, I'd gotten the idea into my head of social harm, and I was having a lot of fun with it. They rolled really badly at a consort roll, I think it was, and I just said that the conversation went kind of badly, it was awkward, and you felt embarrassed. I gave them level 1 harm, embarrassed, because the harm then has like mechanical effects later on that, like, if you try and do something similar, your harm might impact. So then I was like, okay, for the rest of the night when you're trying to do social stuff, like, you're going to be a bit more awkward because you're embarrassed about how badly
you keep
that
thinking
conversation
about
went.
that one thing,
so which I love. But then because it was only level 1 harm, and this player wanted to do other stuff than heal, they were embarrassed for weeks. I was like, how are you still embarrassed about that one conversation? It's been months.
I relate to that, where you're sleeping at night and you go, oh no, I said that one thing 3 years ago and I've never got over it. Yeah,
it's too real. It's too real. So I like the automatic healing a lot.
Yes.
As a way to just be like clearing those minor harms that like are unlikely to really make sense to be sticking around for that long.
Yeah, the temporary conditions, and like having as many of them until like you get back and you're out of peril. I was just like, yeah, that makes so much more sense. And and appreciate with the deep cuts as well. It's like, okay, this will obviously change some of the playbooks. Here's what the changes are. You're like, oh, thank God, I don't have to work out what it is. And like when someone goes, but I can't do this anymore, it's like, oh God, it's like, it's definitely worth sort of like looking into these things. With GMing for Blades in the Dark, I wanted to ask about like the actual setting up of a role. So obviously it's called the action role or the threat role now, depending on which deep cuts or the core book you use. And there's this idea of a position and effect. And I wanted to know, I'm sure you've used it. I was like, could you describe what that is? Because that feels very different to other role-playing games.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely took me a minute to get my head around at first, because as you say, it's very different from a lot of games where you just say, roll this, and that's it. So because this game is so heavily around consequences and you're so likely to get a consequence, like part of calling for a roll for the GM is to set up kind of how bad will this go if it goes wrong. And there's two ways to do that. So one is the position, which there's three. There is controlled, risky, or desperate. The majority of roles in Blades are risky. That's kind of your standard level. So it's like, this is risky, you're doing something which could go wrong. Controlled is kind of when it's like, actually you've set this up really well, like even if it goes wrong, it's probably not going to go that badly for you. And then you've got desperate, which is, oh no, like if you get anything other than a 6, we are in trouble, lads. Like that is desperate. So that's kind of setting that level of like how high are the stakes right now. And then you have the secondary thing to consider, which is your effect, which again, I think it's greater, lesser, or standard. So most rolls are going to be your standard effect. But if you're trying to do something that's really, really hard, so it's like, okay, I want to pick this lock, but I've run out of loads, so I don't have any lock picks. And also there's a guard around the corner who'll probably hear if I take too long. And also, there's like X, Y, Z, there's all these different things going on. I might say, okay, well, you can try and pick this lock, but you're going to have reduced effect because it's pretty unlikely, even if you roll a 6, that you're just going to be able to like click and open it really easily. It's going to be hard. But similarly, if you say, I'm going to pick this lock, and I actually have a background that I'm a locksmith, and I brought these fine lock picking tools, and this lock actually is rusty. You already said it was rusty when you were describing it, so it's probably going to be really easy. Then I'll say, okay, you have greater effect. Even if you roll a 4 or a 5, like you're probably just going to super easily get through this lock. So that is kind of that. It's like, how much peril are you in, and how likely is this to go well for you? Is kind of how I take it. And it seems like at first, I think that's so much conversation to have for every role. But once your players kind of get used to the terminology, I think for me, I'm usually just kind of going, okay, I think that sounds like risky standard. And then maybe one of my players will say, well, actually, I have this item, ta-da, I brought this item with me, as we discussed earlier, which is going to help me. So I'm like, okay, your effect is increased because you're using that item to help you. And it just allows you to have that really quick check-in with like, this is where we're at right now.
Yeah.
And it also, like, certainly my players, I don't know, I feel like probably most Blades GMs will have this. Hearing this is going to be a desperate roll is like, oh no, it's a really good shorthand for like shit's hitting the fan. Like, this is going to be desperate. You're like, oh, we're in trouble. Oh no. So I actually ended up really liking it because not only does it give you that shorthand for checking in with like how are things going, but also it opens that dialogue to give your players a chance to think like, oh, I don't like those odds. How can I improve this situation?
Yeah.
Can I spend stress to like improve the dice roll? Can I ask one of the other players to like one of the other crew members do something to assist me?
Yeah.
Can I ask for a devil's bargain, which I don't think we've talked about yet?
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, just to say on that, yeah. So I think that it's so interesting because it's opening up that thing and making sure everyone's on the same page. Because the amount of times I've done a roll, I've gone great, and they go, okay, well you've done this, but you get this, and I go, oh well, that wasn't explained to me. I just the room in my head is in my head. It's not the same that room that's in your head. So yeah, so I like it. You always check in with that sort of standard and just making sure that everyone knows before. Yeah, it's putting the consequences. This is what's going to happen if you succeed or fail. You don't like hide it behind like, oh, it's a 12. Well, you don't get it. It's everyone knows what's coming up, and I like that because then, as you said, they go right. Well, I can do this because I've got this ability. So then you're engaging with your character more. So yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a bit clunky at first because again, we're so used to like roll and done. But actually having that quick check-in before each roll, or depending on what the roll is, I think, people get very excited. Go, okay, it's got to be right. And then when you roll that 6, you're like, excellent, it was desperate, but I got 6. Limited impact. It's fine. We got in. Phew,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in the series that just aired, at one point, one of the characters decided to try and attack a spirit warden, who is a very, very, very powerful faction.
That's why.
Such a bad idea.
I've read how scary they are in this book. I would never touch. Oh my god!
Spirit wardens are so scary. So they said this like, I think I want to like try and attack them, and I said, well, that will be desperate, and you will definitely have like very reduced effect because these people are powerful, and that's a way again of just saying, are you sure that like this is the stakes of this decision you're making, so you know what it is before you decide to roll that die? And of course, because my cast were absolutely brilliant on that game, she went, yeah, all right, I'll do it. Because of course, let's go.
Yeah, again, it's like I'm going to do this. Got to make the chances and stuff like that. But yeah, I just the spirit wardens in general, because of this idea of like when corpses, because obviously the idea of ghosts being very chaotic and like disrupting stuff, they come out and they control, like if they find a dead body, there's these birds that come and find them and stuff like that. So you just don't mess with them because oh god, yeah, no. I instantly, as soon as you said that, I was like, oh no, not the spirit wardens. Like,
yeah, they all wear masks so you can't see their faces. They're so scary.
It's
so scary.
You mentioned just then the devil's bargain sort of thing. So yeah, another sort of unique element of it now. So yeah, what's the devil's bargain in this system?
Oh, so the devil's bargain is probably one of my favorite mechanics in Blades. It's so great, which is basically when you really, really want something to succeed, you can ask to have an extra die. So roll 1 more d6, and you usually would be allowed to. But you have to take a consequence that's decided beforehand, even if you roll a 6.
Yeah.
So you basically, they'll say, I really want to be able to pick this lock. What's a devil's bargain? And I'd say, well, okay, you can have an extra die by making this devil's bargain, but when you pick this lock, you're going to cut your hand. You'll take harm.
Yeah.
Or when you pick this lock, there's going to be a guard standing on the other side of that door. Guaranteed.
Yeah.
And then the player can kind of make the choice, like, that sounds fun, let's go for it. Or like, actually, that's a bit too much. I think I'll just roll with this number of dice I have and not risk there being a guard standing right there.
Mm-hmm.
But I love it because it's a really fun way to add in sort of unexpected consequences. Maybe things that are a bit more left field that I wouldn't feel good about just throwing at people without warning, but I can do when there's warning. So I might say, all right, you can pick this lock, but it's taking a long time and somebody outside is called the Bluecoats.
Yes.
Like, which maybe like if they just like failed on a lock picking check, it would be kind of rude to be like, oh, you rolled a 3, the Bluecoats are coming. But I can say, you want a devil's bargain? You can do this, but the Bluecoats are going to be on their way. I think it's really fun. And again, it's another way of making the game a bit more collaborative.
Yes.
I do love when the players aren't just being sat and being told what's happening in the story, but have a bit of a chance to influence it. So I often will even be like, do you have an idea for what your devil's bargain would be?
Yes.
Like, What
Yeah.
do you what kind of consequence do you want? Let's go. Like, let's figure it out.
I'm a big fan of that. Yeah, it talks about it a bit more in deep cuts as well, saying like, yeah, anyone can give a devil's bargain sort of at any point. But yeah, I like it in this particular one where you could just open it up to the table, like, what do we think? Like, because I've got a few ideas, but I'd love to hear you. So yeah, I just everything about Blades in the Dark, it feels so collaborative, from character creation all the way up to like what the heist is going to be, and then yeah, that story is just bam, bam, bam. You get rid of all you cut off all the fat of all the planning and sitting around and stuff like that. You always feel like you're doing something, and it always feels like with your characters as well. Yeah, like we said before, you've got certain skills, specializations, and you can train them up and stuff like that. But it always feels like everything you do, you're so confident, you're planned to do it, and you're good at it. It just so happens that, oh no, you rolled badly. Well, the blue cuts here. Spirit Warden's always about, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's that sort of thing where it's so different to other games. I find like I hadn't really. Like I said, I've only played like in a couple of those like one-off ones, but it's so interesting how deep you can go with the story and actually make a really interesting, very different story as well.
I think that everyone's version of Duskfall becomes its own city as you play, and I really love that. And again, like referring back to the Deep Cuts document, it has ideas for things like new innovations, technology that's been introduced since the book was first published. Which again, one of them is a camera, which actually one of my players in my long campaign, they played the Leech playbook, who does a lot of inventing. They invented a camera in that campaign. It took them a long time, but they did do it. So I was
That's
like,
so
again,
cool.
this feels logical to like, if you have been playing this game for a long time, some of the stuff that's being introduced in Deep Cuts feels like, yes, perfect. This is like some new spice to sprinkle on top.
To go back to it, yeah, it feels very much like Peaky Blinders from the brief bit I've watched of it. Because first season, there's lots of horses and stuff like that, and then second season, third season, they're in cars. And
Yes.
in Deep Cut, they have cars. Not everyone has a car, but like, you can have that, and you can have the is it spark runners as well, where you can run across electric, like so
Runners
cool.
running across electric wires. Yeah, I love it, and it does reflect like the speed at which during the Industrial Revolution, which is kind of the time that it's based on. Stuff was happening that quickly, like innovations were just coming, like the world was changing so drastically. There's also new factions in Deep Cuts, which I love, some of which were mentioned but didn't have much fleshing out, so now it's a bit more like, here's some more ideas for stuff those factions will be doing.
And even again, not to spoil it too much, because I appreciate like if you're playing in Blades of Dark or want to play in it, and you Deep Cuts has this sort of, we sort of mentioned this big sort of story hook about, because there are this idea of like, well, if we've got ghosts and stuff like that, there's other dimensions, maybe there's portals and stuff, and maybe things go into them and things come out of them. And I just thought that was such an interesting way of making it, again, sort of a bit more maybe eldritch, bit more sort of sci-fi if you wished it to, because then it talks about, well, what kind of things are on the other side of these portals. Is it just Dustfall but is a mirror dimension like Star Trek wise, or is it like modern day now, or this? And I just thought, wow, yeah, I mean, depending on what your players want to do, that sort of flavor, like, you probably get a good sense of it. But then they go, yeah, there's a portal, and oh, Steve's come back, Steve looks changed, that sort of really I just thought that the sort of the new factions surrounding that, I just thought, oh yeah, I'd love to play that. But I feel like for me, it feels like something that you would do if you were like playing or running Blades in the Dark after you've played like a campaign or two, because I really love just the original setting. I love Dustfall. I just thought it's so interesting, even though it's been out for 10 or more years. And obviously recently we've had this new Blades 68 that's just come out as well.
Yes.
I just feel like this original setting is just really, I'm just like going like, there's no other game like it. There's no other sort of steampunky-esque game that isn't its own system. But we'll have a 5th edition settings, Eberron, all that sort of thing. But here, I'm just like, everything about this is really cool. So I definitely would run it vanilla flavor, if you see what I mean. That's like original flavor before maybe attempting like the Deep Cuts sort of plotted, or even like Blade 68. But again, obviously it's a dealer's choice, I guess, with your players.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's stuff, like you say, the sort of new catalyst thing with these portals. Like, I would probably, and the new factions, like, get to know some of the ones that are already there. There's so much fun already, but when you're ready for something more, then it's there. But there's also stuff that I think you could totally start with. There's more sort of heritage and background, more character creation options, basically, in Deep Cuts, which I like, because I think one thing I found when I'm introducing the game to new people, and they're saying, well, which heritage should I pick? And I'm like, oh, it's kind of flavor text, so whatever. And they're like, well, tell me about them. And I'm like, there's not that much.
There isn't,
which is in one way good if you have players who are like so excited to like just make it up. Brilliant. But some people, and there's no right or wrong way, prefer to have a bit more of a basis.
Right.
And say, I want to know what the types are. and pick one. So this document has, I think it says like it has 100 different, like, and they're very short. They're like a sentence.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you can have like a scholarly background. Maybe you were a librarian at this library. Maybe you studied this subject, and it just gives you lots and lots and lots of little prompts of the types of people who might exist in this world. And I think that's fabulous, even for brand new players, if you want to get a sense of the flavor of the world without reading all of the lore and potentially spoiling stuff your GM wants to surprise you with. 100%. You could read that big list of background prompts to help you to create your character. I think that's lovely.
Yeah, I agree. It's just, giving you something to start off with, because, if it's just like, you are an academia, you're like, that could be anything. Oh my God, and you want to, you want to be able to have something, but not be too overwhelmed with the lore. Because it's one thing as GMs, when we read this stuff, we go, oh my God, so many cool things I could do it. But the players go, oh my God, so many things.
Yes.
So I think it's different responses, but equally sort of valid. My final sort of question to you is that if someone was going to pick up Blades in the Dark after seeing Euphoria's stream on it or from us talking about it, what's your big bit of advice you would say for someone who's running it for the first time?
My advice would be, my favorite advice is to watch an actual play of the game to give you a sense of like how a session runs. Hey, as we've mentioned a few times, I just GM'd one. Hey, other actual plays are available, but check out the one on Euphoria if you want to see how I run it.
Yeah, but
also I think it's again just kind of having that conversation with the people at your table to say this game is different from a lot of other TTRPGs in that you will have consequences and things going wrong all the time. That is part of the fun. And we're going to discover an interesting story together by exploring those consequences of when the dice aren't on your side, rather than coming up with a very, very clear story that you want to tell that session with story beats planned in advance. Just have a hook. Have like, this needs to happen. Somebody wants you to steal this, or there's a ghost running around in this district and you've got to sort it out. And then let's all find out together how you're going to try and do that and how it goes wrong and what you do next. And just roll with the punches and roll with the consequences. And that would be my piece of advice is for the GM as well as the players, roll with what happens. Don't try and be too in control of the narrative. Let the game build a narrative with you and you'll have a lot of fun.
Oh, amazing. Oh, Michelle, thank you so much for indulging me by going, Blades in the Dark sounds good. I wonder who I know who's really good at it and has run a series recently. Honestly, thank you so much. And I 100% support. Go check out Euphoria's Blades in the Dark series. It's a wonderful, wonderful time, and Michelle is a fantastic GM. Where can we find you if you want to be found on the internet? What's coming up for you, my friend?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to talk at length about my favorite game system, because I will do it with almost no prompting, but I know I was allowed to today, which was fun. I am Michelle Kelly. I am an actor, voice actor, and TTRPG performer. You can find me on social medias, some of them. You'll have to just see at Michelle Copter. I think Blue Sky and Instagram are probably the ones I post on the most these days. I am also on staff at Euphoria, which is an actual play network focused on the talent and diversity of the European actual play scene. We try to spotlight games written by European creators and cast actual play performers who are all from or based in Europe. So check us out. We love what we do. And I'm popping up all over the place doing actual plays these days. So if you find me on socials, you'll probably see an announcement for what I'm in next.
Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Michelle. It's honestly been a delight. And I highly recommend you go check out all of Michelle's amazing work. Like, your GMing is second to none. So I'm always excited when I see you announce as a GM. I'm like, and you've also been on Where for the Tales of the Old West as well. We were in that.
I know, it was a great time.
Yeah, it was a wild cowboy family dealing with issues in the West, but we had fun. Nothing went wrong. Nobody died.
Speaking of dealing with things going very badly wrong.
But thank you so much. And thanks everyone for listening. Please go check out Blades in the Dark. Check out Deep Cuts. I'm sure at some point, Michelle, we might have you back for something else, whether it's a Blades 68 or another system of your choice. It doesn't have to be constantly Blades, even though I know it's your favorite system. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week for another episode of the DM's Book Club. But until then, friends, we'll see you later, and goodbye.